Hillary has been lengthening her excuses as to why she lost the election. She didn't really lose the election. It was stolen from her by, I think it's up to 24 different excuses she has now. Number 24 is content farms in Macedonia. And as I said, my grandfather was a Macedonian content farmer, and we often think about, gathering on the porch and recalling the old days on the Macedonian. He never thought that the old content farmers he left behind in Macedonia would one day steal the U.S. presidential election. They are gnarled, hard-working Macedonian peasants, and the way they were able to reach out and steal the election from a well-oiled machine.
What is it? June, July, August, or September for the parliamentary elections in Macedonia? Zoran Zaev, leader of the Socialists in Macedonia, wants elections yesterday, or within roughly 3 weeks of the end of the state of emergency, which was recently extended by President Stevo Pendarovski until roughly the end of May, even while admitting that this was probably unconstitutional. The center-right in Macedonia, Vomerodopamene, are arguing for elections later, perhaps August or September, after the current wave of coronavirus infections and deaths has hopefully subsided. Other parties, notably the smaller ethnic Albanian parties, have various positions on when elections should be held. And the State Election Commission, probably an important institution to consult before a country holds elections, has weighed in and said, in no uncertain terms, that elections cannot be organized within the time period that Zoran Zaev wants, and that between 50 and 60 days would be needed. And finally there is, this being Macedonia, the international factor. OSCE and their election monitoring mission, oh dear, says they are still waiting for a date from the government before they can state when they would be able to deploy both their short-term and long-term observation missions. We'll discuss all of this and more in this episode of the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast. I'm Jason Miko, coming to you from the center of Tucson, Arizona.
And this is Cvetin calling in from the still-peaking Republic of Macedonia.
Still under, let's see, you're under a state of emergency for another 2 weeks.
Yep.
I see from the news that some of the more restrictive curfews have gradually been lifted a bit, I guess.
Yeah, nobody's following the rules anyway anymore.
Rules are for little people.
We decided we're not playing anymore.
Okay, good. Well, yeah. Well, I mean, frankly, let's be honest. That's the way it's been around the planet. You can't keep people down and You can't keep people in lockdown forever unless you are a totalitarian state. And Macedonia is kind of on the border of that.
It's going there.
Yeah, kind of like some of our states here in the country, but we obviously have more freedoms here, and the people have said, hell no, we're not going to take it anymore. So they're going out to the beaches, and the restaurants are opening up, and people are getting their haircuts and all that. I got my haircut last week. It felt great.
I still haven't gotten around to it.
Are you looking like Grizzly Adams?
Yeah, I'm not very representative.
Well, I only shave twice a week now because it doesn't really matter, but I do shave. So
yeah,
you're a bearded gentleman. So
yeah.
Anyway.
YOLO. We are all doing YOLO now.
All right. So this week it seems that we are recording this episode 72 of the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast on Tuesday, May 19, 2020. As I mentioned in the monologue, President Pendarovski, unconstitutionally, as he himself admitted, just extended the state of emergency until what, May 30, May 30, 31, something like that?
Yeah, the end of May.
End of May, okay, yeah, which is in 2 weeks. So, and now the race is on to figure out when the elections are going to be held. With Zoran Zaev mentioning, I think, June 21 or 22, within 3 weeks of the end of the state of emergency. Because, quite simply, and correct me if I'm wrong here, that he believes that early elections, late June, low voter turnout, the economic fallout will not have hit as hard, and he thinks he's got an advantage in that, right?
There's so many reasons, and I'm confused. I'm really not sure he's pushing for this so strongly. There is something is up, but there are several competing theories. One is the economic fallout, which still hasn't been felt in the public. Another is just having, laughably low turnout elections, which obviously we're going to have if they're held in June, nobody is going to show up and vote. This thing is killing old people, and old people are the ones who are, showing up to vote in the elections normally. So maybe he hopes that with a low turnout election, he can rig it more easily, or just draw his own supporters by hook and crook, by pressuring them, by threatening them that they will lose their jobs, and then, if hundreds of them die afterwards as a result of the elections, who cares? And then there is another possibility, because we're supposed to begin EU accession talks at some point in this year. Bulgaria demands concessions on Goce Delchev, declaring him a Bulgarian, on giving up the language, etc., before they allow the opening of accession talks. It's a bit too much for Zaev to give these concessions before the elections. It would cost him in the elections. So maybe he just wants, elections in June. He still loses, but forms a government with the Albanians somehow, with the help of the diplomats. And then the next day, if the elections are June 21st, June 22nd, he signs documents saying that Goce Delchev was Bulgarian, blah, 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 and Bulgaria allows the opening of accession talks. Otherwise, they have painted themselves in a corner, and they would not allow this without serious concessions from Zaev, and this is supposed to happen, the accession talks soon. I mean, one of the EU frameworks they're preparing, it was announced in June. So this is, they have so many reasons why he wants elections quickly, none of them good, and he's really, in your face, in everybody's face about this.
Right. Yeah. I just saw a tweet not too long ago, this morning, I think it was, from the EU Commissioner for Enlargement, Oliver. I forgot his last name, the Hungarian.
You should be able to pronounce it.
I should, yeah, I know, but it's terribly embarrassing. But anyway, moving on. He tweeted out that the negotiating framework for both Macedonia and April would be prepared in June, and that the reports on both countries' progress would be sometime in the fall. He did not say when talks would actually start. You just mentioned June there. I think there's some confusion even within the European Union as to when those talks would be, regardless of what the Bulgarians do. And then also on top of all of that, I think it was President Pendarovsky last week said that after the elections, Macedonian society would come together and form a consensus on what to do about Bulgaria and their demands on Macedonia, which I find quite amusing because, let's be honest, Macedonian society is divided. There will not be a consensus amongst the hardcore, and I'm making a distinction here, hardcore citizen voters and activists and everybody else. The ethnic Albanian parties probably don't care. They do want to have accession talks begin no matter what. They're not giving. They could care less about what happens with the history, etc. But my point being that the issue of consensus, there ain't going to be no consensus. Going back to the referendum on September 30, 2018, the very Lockean principle of the consent of the governed, obviously the government gave Macedonians a chance to give their consent to changing the name, and the people said no, and the government went ahead and did it anyway, which is exactly, to your point, what they're going to do with the issue of Bulgaria. How they're going to do it's a different question, I think.
Yeah, definitely. We did arrive at a consensus once, not. It was a complete disaster, and this is obviously what Pendarovsky and Zaev consider as having consensus, just bribing several more members of parliament if they're needed to, or several more historians, and signing off whatever anybody asks of them to sign on.
Yeah. Now, the question is, how is Macedonian society going to respond to this? I've been a little bit, I have to admit, disappointed that people have not come out into the streets and started raising hell. Granted, now during the past couple of months, you haven't been able to do that because of the coronavirus and the various draconian measures that kept people locked down. You could make the case that in the summer, people are going to go on holiday, but actually you can't go anywhere.
Yeah.
So I was I was reading an article earlier about how the other European countries want to open up for tourism, but a number of these countries said that new tourist arrivals will have to self quarantine for 14 days. Well, Americans get 2 weeks of vacation a year anyway, so
Yeah.
forget that. We can't just fly into Spain and self quarantine for 2 weeks and then leave. Europeans have a much more generous social welfare system, so maybe they're willing to take a month off and spend the first 2 weeks in quarantine somewhere, but that remains to be
No,
seen.
no,
But
no.
I did see, switching the subject slightly, but staying on the topic of elections and summer and whatnot, that Vomero Dopamine said that Macedonians, should really consider a, what we call here a staycation. So,
Yeah,
spend your summer in Macedonia, touring Macedonia, seeing parts of
yeah.
Macedonia that you've never seen, and I like to brag a little bit. Next week we're going to talk about my 24th anniversary with Macedonia. I still think, Cvetin, and you and I have had this debate before. You've never been to Kratovo, have
Yeah, I
you?
may eventually get to go to Kratovo this year.
I've been there 3 times, so
Hooray!
I think I've been to more places in Macedonia than most Macedonians. Now I can say the same thing about other countries like Estonia as well. Yeah, so we'll see if Macedonians get out and spend their summers and their money within Macedonia as they vacation in the many beautiful places around Macedonia. But yes, so back on elections. What can we look forward to in terms of what's the next step, I should say, in this ongoing drama and saga of determining when the elections are going to be held?
Well, they had two meetings of party leaders in 2 weeks. And no decision was reached, no consensus was reached. Vomero says late August, September. SDSM demands as soon as possible, late June, very early July at the latest, and the Albanian parties are all over the place. They're
Right.
driven by, the need to have the borders open so their voters can fly in from from Switzerland or Germany or wherever, and come from Kosovo. But also they're, bargaining with both parties to draw concessions for after the elections. Whether they would, it's important for Zaev to be able to say, well, listen, DUI supported my proposal, the alliance supported my proposal. That's going to cost him, but Zaev is very cavalier in giving away stuff, especially communally owned stuff for personal gains. The
Right.
U.S. ambassador supported Zaev. Obviously, she said you definitely need a functional government, and there is a second wave coming. I don't know how they know this, but they all insist on this. Zaev and the ambassador, and somehow they insist we would be better prepared if the elections are held. Until then, it's obviously, not an issue. We have a government. Zaev has the government he would like best right now in place. They can do whatever they want. They can continue extending the state of emergency, and nobody bats an eye, like in the case of Hungary, for example. So, they can't continue to function. But obviously, the ambassador and Zaev want a full new mandate for Zaev, hoping that they would use, maybe electoral theft in low turnout, maybe this bump in the polls, which every government has had at the start of the crisis and will probably lose as the crisis continues. So, we're not sure legally how to do this. We haven't canceled the elections, which were postponed or canceled, whatever any way you want to look at this legally. There is an article in the declaration of the state of emergency that the electoral activities are postponed, which Zaev now says means that they resume after the state of emergency is lifted. It actually says this. So technically, elections, Zaev insists, resume as soon as my friend Stevo Pendarovsky says that the state of emergency is lifted. But we've never, set the date in this way. It's always a matter of consensus, or the government, the ruling majority in parliament votes on this. And there is no parliament, there is no ruling majority. So just holding elections by decree of the president, a partisan figure, no matter how he views himself. That's unheard of, especially with people dying. I mean, this could definitely cost us, million people voting, or let's say, low turnout. Let's say 400,000 people vote. We would still have. Just imagine, okay, even if you vote, get in and get out, mask, wrap yourself in cellophane and everything. Uh, there are people who are sitting there all day long, public sector employees. They need to interact with hundreds of people daily. I mean, during the election. I mean, among these people, there's no chance they're going to avoid the virus. And I mean, I had my reservations at the start as how serious this is, but it has been hyped in the public mind that it's dangerous and people are gonna stay out. And now VMRO is announcing that if the elections are held by this, using this essentially a decree from the president, unconstitutional, etc., that VMRO says we are going to boycott. And that means we're going to have 200, 300,000 people voting, and that's it.
Of course, then that puts into question the legitimacy of any government that's elected, assuming that citizens were to go ahead and hold elections in. Then you also have, and I'm curious as to this, so OSCE, their monitoring mission is called ODIHR, which is pronounced ODIHR, which I find hilarious if you look at it in the English language. But anyway, they're supposed to have a monitoring observation mission in Macedonia. They have short-term and long-term observers. Long-term, I think, are 60 days. Short-term, I don't know, week, 2 weeks maybe, I can't remember.
Yeah.
But Macedonia, and frankly, most of the OSCE countries, I think all of them probably, have allowed the election monitors to come in before any major election. Parliamentary, presidential, local, what have you, and and then to give their assessment of the elections leading up to it and during and then after and whatnot. But if Zoran Zaev gets his way and has elections on June 21 or 22, OSCE, ODIHR, hasn't even said that they would come in. They're still waiting for a date. If they don't come in for whatever reason, doesn't that also put into question the legitimacy of any elections?
I mean, the OSCE mission here is hugely partisan. They have supported Zaev through thick and thin. They've been able, in 2017, they've been able to ignore the fact that dozens of VMRO mayors had charges systematically filed against them ahead of the municipal elections, the first elections Zaev organized, and that a candidate who was running against Dui in Kičevo was killed before the elections, and they still gave a good passing grade. Minor irregularities here and there. It was a wholesale abuse of the judiciary, and a guy got killed, whacked.
Wow.
So, I mean, they would completely, give Zaev a tongue bath in this case, and they sent a letter today saying that we are ready to send a mission whenever you set the date. They don't raise any issues. They just say it will depend on the travel arrangements, which Zaev can easily lift. I mean, through the government, they can just say, okay, whoever wants to fly into Macedonia, starting tomorrow, it's open, no quarantine, nothing. So, yeah, I mean, this can easily be arranged that this condition is met. And still, as I said, I mean, most famously now, we're still waiting for OSCE to respond after the arrest of, the sentencing of Alexander Mitovsky, the suspended sentence for publishing, the Infomax editor, for publishing evidence that Zaev is corrupt, while ignoring this. But weeks later, OSCE responds after, honestly, a minor issue in which a pro-SDSM journalist received comments from a guy in Germany. I'm gonna come there and don't let me see you cross my street, etc. I mean, it's okay. Shouldn't threaten people, but respond in one instance, but then ignore another. I mean, it's a partisan organization. They literally sent the head of the Soros Foundation in Washington, a former U.S. diplomat, Jeff Goldstein, to Skopje to be deputy head of the OSCE mission, right in time for the 2016 elections. And you can imagine what type of reports and monitoring OSCE did. It's completely, it was completely in on this. We've discussed often that embassies in Skopje were obviously involved in regime change, and OSCE was one of the most heavily involved in this.
Right.
So
Yeah.
we can't really.
Well, we we know, taking a step back and taking a 30,000-foot, 10,000-meter perspective, we know that all of these international institutions are aligned against and have a worldview which is very different from the center-right, freedom-loving parties, especially those in Europe, well, around the world, but especially in Europe, since that's what we're talking about. So we know that, and the State Department, of course, as well. The State Department has always been an institution that is aligned against traditional concepts of freedom and liberty, and that's just the way it is. And changing that's going to take a monumental task. But let's take a step back to what I mentioned in the opening monologue about the State Election Commission, because they have weighed in as well. And as I said, that's probably an important institution to have involved in organizing elections, the State Election Commission, and they've come out and said that they need at least 50 to 60 days to resume where they left off and to organize the elections. But our listeners would probably be interested in knowing how that works from a process standpoint, in terms of does the State Election Commission have the power to say, no, we're not going to do this, or are they subject, as are most institutions in Macedonia, to the will and whim of the Prime Minister and the leader of Citizen?
Historically, the head of the commission is an opposition appointee, and in this case, it is. He was nominated by Vimera, but some of the SDSM appointees to the commission have been counteracting him. They were saying, no, we can hold the elections. Obviously, to an observer, it just makes sense that with all the mess that's been going on, the commission will need more time than the 21 days which Zaev is willing to give them. Usually, you remember what huge issues were vetting the electoral rolls, and there are deadlines in which members of candidates need to apply for. Parties need to apply with lists of candidates. There is monitoring of media and millions of things going on, with each holding strict deadlines. But obviously, Zaev wants to bulldoze all of them. It's possible. I think it's possible that the head of the commission resigns, and then you don't have a commission, or because you need to have the opposition nominate another person. So there are stalling tactics which Vimera can do, and which SDSM has done in the past too. During the crisis of 2015, they had their guy, an SDSM appointee who headed the commission, just resign or refuse to sign this, or just hide in his office. So there are things which you can do if, Vimera is adamant that elections will not take place, but if they do, we're going to boycott. So when they say they're not going to take place, I assume they're going to withdraw their people from the commission and, otherwise block its normal functioning. This can, it just makes sense. I'm still amazed we're even discussing holding elections now, and there are many ways in which you can, obstruct the elections. Not least of which is just calling for a boycott and just warning the people who would need to take place, who would need to sit in a school classroom and interact with 200 people during the day, about the risks involved. And I don't know. There are many things which people can do to boycott, to block these elections.
Yeah, and I think it's worth reminding listeners that Macedonia had these same issues back in 2016. May have even started in 2015, as I recall. But I know 2016 there were supposed to be parliamentary elections were scheduled they were scheduled 3 times. The third time they were held. The first 2 times the dates were set. Parties, people were preparing, and then at that point the opposition, Citizen, and their colorful revolutionaries and the civil society organizations and the Open Society Institution Foundation, etc., all said, no, the voter lists aren't correct. We need to, we need to go back and look at those. Of course, the bottom line is that nothing ever happened with the voter list. They're the same bloody voter list that we had back in 2016, and I've seen a number of people on the Twitter sphere and other social media outlets, and even news articles talk about the fact that Macedonia has not had a census since 2002. So the voter rolls of 1.8 million and change are, who knows? I've seen numbers anywhere, as low as there's actually 1.5 million people in Macedonia, which means the voter rolls would be even less. So the whole idea of holding a census has been talked about and dismissed several times over the past 10 years. And at some point, Macedonia is going to have a census. They're going to have to come to a consensus about having a census. So that you can get those voter rolls cleaned up.
Albanian villages vote with 40% tops, and that tells you how many people actually they are citizens, but actually don't live here. And as you mentioned, Nikola Gruevski was so cavalier, he allowed Zaev to pick a date in elections. We've never had elections in December. We voted in December 2016. And he gave him several key positions in the government, a deal which Zaev accepted now would apply to Vemara in return, and then went back on it and removed the labor and welfare minister, Roshila Mizrahi, after subjecting her to this horrific anti-Semitic campaign. And Gruevski also gave Zaev a prosecutor, completely unchecked in her powers, and a completely deranged person and completely partisan person, and
that turned out well.
Greedy and whatnot. So these are the conditions which Vemara gave SDSM and still beat, and Gruevski still beat Zaev, who only narrowed the difference in votes with an unprecedented transfer of Albanian votes from DUI to his own party, obviously engineered by the US Embassy. And now Zaev is like, no, this is unacceptable. This is going to lead us into a crisis if you postpone the elections. He held the entire country hostage and created untold crisis since 2012.
Right.
But now it's not acceptable when now people have to vote in a Corona election. This is just beyond the pale. Even for Zaev, this is low.
Yeah, and for those playing the Macedonian Content Farmers Bingo, get out your bingo cards, because I keep mentioning this, that SDSM, before 1991, was the League of Communists of Macedonia. So they were formed originally with a type of communist Marxist mentality. They've jettisoned that, obviously. Their junior party, DUI, Ali Ahmeti, it's always worth talking about. I'm going to keep hammering this home. Ali Ahmeti was a Marxist-Leninist. Some might say he still is. But these are people and parties and players that very much covet power and are very, very reluctant to give up power. And so I think that's a manifestation of what we're seeing right now, is that they just are loath to give up power. Plus, and this is a nice little transition, they know that given the number of scandals that they are currently facing, that at some point, and that they've got the various prosecutors there are trials going on, most of them against the former party, but some of their own people have got cut up in this. They know that if they do lose power, that they're going to have to answer for their alleged crimes. And I noticed that last week, or since our last podcast, Cvetin, Dan Donchev has been in the news again, the former director of the Health Fund, who resigned 2 weeks ago for quote-unquote health and family reasons. But there has been more. I think Branko Geroski, who started broke this news, a year ago, he had another article, I think in Plus Info or one of the outlets, exposing even more some of the scandals, the alleged scandals that Dan Donchev is in. What can you tell our listeners about that?
There was some plane yesterday caught on these websites which show planes flying in real time here and there. And this one took off from Skopje and then headed south and then turned around and I think circled a couple of times. Either somebody was taking a joyride over Macedonia or trying to leave the country and was not allowed to and then circled back. So we had a lot of fun speculating who this is. I mean, yeah, just hearing Dan Donchev run a 700 million euros a year operation was, just waiting for a disaster to happen. And happen it did. Gerovsky claims that there is another witness who testified now against Donchev directly, specifically, saying that he paid hundreds of thousands of euros, I think almost a million. I just quickly skimmed through the article. In bribes, because then Donchev and Venko Filipče, the heroic, obviously actually hugely corrupt healthcare minister, but who has been declared the hero of the pandemic in Macedonia, the two of them, they blocked the sale of this company which had a public contract to provide dialysis services, to set up the dialysis centers in the eastern part of the country, and the company wanted to, go international, to sell itself. Actually, had an offer from a Swedish company, Diaverum, apparently a big time dialysis provider internationally, and that Filipče and Donchev demanded that this sale is stopped and that the Macedonian company sold to an Albanian company they had links with, and when this failed, when the Swedes insisted that they get a 10% cut almost of the sale. It was like 11 million sale. They wanted, so the sum I think is 900,000 euros. Otherwise they would block the payment. So, you provide the service, you do the dialysis, but then you wait for the healthcare fund ran by Dan Donchev to pay you for the service. You provide it and Donchev can block this, can delay this, put it on the back burner for weeks, months, for a whole year maybe even. You're not going to sue him because, you don't sue your main customer who is the government, who has control over the judiciary. And then, the Diamed owners, in their public statements, they would say, listen, as soon as they came with the offer, just to prove that, the blackmail request, just to prove how powerful they are. Like we had for a while, we had our invoices sent to the public fund paid immediately. So like this is our good side. You can get on our good graces if you pay the bribe, and you can sell your company to the Swedes, and we'll take it with them from there. Or you can get on our bad side, in which case you're not getting paid. We're gonna charge you with fraud or whatever. We'll find something through Katica Janeva. One of the people charged in Katica Janeva's extortion scandal was also the muscle sent in this case. So yeah, the prosecutor was asked, is Donchev still in the country? She said, I don't know, but I'm looking into the charges. And the interior minister demanded, he's appointed by Vamara, he demanded that Donchev is put on a stop list and was apparently rejected. So I guess the interior minister, this means he bans you from leaving the country. And apparently the request was not granted. I don't know what the bureaucratic procedure is. This is something you're not supposed to tell the person, obviously.
Sure.
So who knows? He may be on the no-fly list by now, and the flight, which people were joking about yesterday, may have been evidence that he is already on this list. But don't put Dan Donchev in charge of this. No. Everybody knew.
He might be on the no-fly. What about the no-drive list? He given his ties to Bulgaria, he could easily, exit through Bulgaria. Plus, he has a Macedonian passport and an Australian passport.
Can you hike to Australia?
Probably not. So, and I don't even know. I know, Dan's a family man. He's got a wife and 3 kids. I don't know if I wonder where they are. I have no idea.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's yeah. I knew him, not friends, but I mean, I kind of feel bad. This is literally like putting a former drug addict in charge of a pharmacy. I mean, this is we all knew it's not going to work. But okay, I mean, it's Zaev's personnel choices, and this
Well,
is just the most radical example.
it is, yeah. And as we talked about last week, they're family friends, both from Mrtino, I believe, down near
Mm,
Strumica. So anyway, so that all to say, the scandals facing Zoran Zaev and the various members of his government, whether they are, from other parties or not, he obviously wants to stay in power so that he doesn't have to face those scandals at some point. But this is the lesson of politics around the world, Cvetin, is that no party remains in power forever. Vomero discovered that, and Citizen is going to discover that either
mm,
now or later. And again, taking that 30,000 foot, 10,000 meter perspective, and kind of talking about all of the violence, literal violence that Citizen has done to Macedonia's
mm.
name and identity and heritage and culture and history, all of the violence that they have inflicted on Macedonia against the will of the Macedonians, all that there's going to be a reckoning, both for
Oh
those
yeah.
who did it, and then there's going to be a move to right those wrongs and to restore Macedonia's name, etc., which is going to take place at some point. It will happen. How it's going to happen, that's above my pay grade in terms of
Mm.
constitutional courts or the parliament or other ways. That's for people much smarter than me to figure that out. But it will happen. It has to happen for the continuity of Macedonia and the Macedonians, regardless of what Kate Burns or any of the other Westerners there say. Uh,
Yeah, we could be in a good position to inflict some damage and payback and leverage a position now as a NATO member. In theory, we should be able to block things and advance things. But so far, that's interesting. Now we are a NATO member, and we're still acting like like children. Like anybody threatens us, we just go, okay, fine, we accept this. Zaev does this now. The Albanians are telling us the deputy prime minister said small nations must accept what big nations tell them. But in theory, becoming a NATO member was supposed to make us an equal part of the alliance and give us some leverage. But under Zaev, we're not going to get even this part of being a NATO member, even if it's like a bully pulpit and nothing more, just like a protest comment from this position, from this meeting of top leaders of most powerful countries in the world in this alliance. They kept telling us, "You're now an equal partner of the most powerful alliance in the world," and we're still acting like children, and that's not sustainable for a country that wants to be an actual NATO member.
Well, not only that, it's bad for NATO itself to have members that don't have
Yeah.
equal status. And it can't say it on publicly and that this is an alliance, a strong alliance of 30 members that all have an equal say,
Mm.
and then treat members like second-class
No.
citizens, because within the structure, within the House of NATO, that will eventually
Mm.
corrode uh, the very structure and the architecture of the
Yeah.
institution, as it creates resentment and envy, which are not good for any organization. And so, and
Yeah.
I'm assuming NATO members know that, but maybe they don't. Maybe they don't care. Maybe they think that well, we'll be gone by then, and it doesn't matter to us. That's generally the way it works with these things.
Yeah, we had another shocking display of cowardice and weakness this week. Pendarovsky was again, apparently secretly, telling international politicians that we cannot accept the partition of Kosovo, the border
Mm-hmm.
swaps which everybody's talking about. The EU Commission, again now with the new commissioner apparently, and the Trumpian ambassador to Berlin, etc. So
It's Richard Grinnell.
Zaev was saying this very scared, but secretly. Zaev was making this statement secretly when he thought he's talking to Poroshenko and Stoltenberg, warning everybody that we're going to collapse if this happens. Pendarovsky was saying this again secretly to a group of journalists and diplomats who came a few months ago. And now he was again saying this. And we know, not because they're telling this publicly, they can't say this because it goes against all they've been telling us, that they've relaxed interethnic relations, that they've made Macedonia safer. They can't be caught in front of the Macedonian public saying that we're going to collapse as a country if there is border change in Kosovo and then it's going to spill over on us. But he was saying this somewhere, and we know because the Serbian defense minister came out and said, this is our deal to make with Kosovo. We are making this deal. If we make it, if we decide to make it, it's not up to you to interfere, stop interfering in our negotiations. And then Vucic, the president, also came and said, I was begging you, Stevo, to stop interfering in this situation. And then there were some harsh words. Pendarovsky was told, nobody recognizes your language.
Wow.
Look where your country is at. So you better shut up in your language which nobody recognizes. It was a very harsh statement from the Serbian defense minister, who talks like that, of course. And and then there were some SDSM people coming, you watch your mouth, they were saying to the Serbian defense minister, you're addressing the president of a NATO member state. And the response to this was universal laughter, like, our guys are not acting like a NATO member state.
Right.
To be respected by Serbia, not to mention that the very issue we're discussing now is that they were telegraphing weakness. They were telling everybody that this NATO member state is going to collapse like a house of cards if the neighboring state redraws its borders. So all the guarantees are for nothing. And Kate Burns says that we discusses this issue of weakness, whether Macedonia is a weak NATO member is exposed to Russian influence, while in reality she should be worried about a weak nation state, period, as a NATO member. I mean, it could just blow up on her.
Well, right, and this goes back to something we've talked about several times and I've written about, and that's identity as a national security issue. If the very identity of the Macedonians, and I'm talking about the ethnic Macedonians in Macedonia, is weakened, that invites mischief, both internally and externally. And so therefore, and this is as simple as I can make it, the way to strengthen the state of Macedonia, the Republic of Macedonia, is to strengthen Macedonian identity. And this is where, something that are for just members of Citizen who are proud Macedonians, I would hope that they are looking at everything that has been inflicted on Macedonia over the past 3 years and say, this is just not good for us. This is not right. It's not good for our past. It's not good for our children. It's not good for our grandchildren. It's not good for generations not yet born. We cannot allow this to continue like this. They set aside the issues of the economic issues and things like that, which are important, of course, and the old adage that people vote their pocketbooks. But if there's no state, if there's no Macedonian state, what does it matter? So, I would.
Zaev is not going to take all of them when he flees the country.
Right. All right. Have we exhausted everything for this week? Do we need to do our farmer's picks now? I have a farmer's pick, actually. I've made a concerted effort, Cvetin, this week to really, find a farmer's pick for this show, because that's the way we started off, and I want to continue it. I want to end on a good note.
You managed to find something positive. Well, let's hear it then.
All right. Yes. Hang on a second. Let me pull it up here. I gotta push the right button. It is a piece from CNN. Believe it or not.
Well,
yes.
Fake news.
I know.
That is fake news.
Yeah, and this is from a few years ago, in 2004, I believe. A CNN piece on Macedonian wine, and I thought so. Frankly, that let's see. Let me pull this up. Oh. All right. So this was, 2010, sorry. CNN did a big feature on Popova and which is in Demrikapia. Jordan Trajkov, my friend, runs the winery and established it. And he has an interesting story because he actually went to school here in Arizona, about 100 miles, 170 kilometers up the road from me at Thunderbird, which is a graduate school MBA program, where he got his MPA, and then came back to Macedonia. He wanted to come back to Macedonia to establish wine tourism, and he's done that. And I've visited the winery, stayed there at the hotel many times, and he's got some fantastic wines. Plus, he has single-handedly almost tried to bring back the one grape varietal that is endemic to Macedonia, Stanoshina, which is a red grape. He grows it. I think a few smaller wineries also grow it and produce wine. But you won't find that grape anywhere else on planet Earth, only in the Republic of Macedonia. And he's really been making an effort to cultivate that, to bring tourists in and things like that. And this is something I've talked about a lot. One of my projects that I eventually want to do is to get Macedonian varietals here in southern Arizona. We have a wine industry here. I actually took, a year ago, I had about 10, 12 bottles of Macedonian wine that I had picked up and brought back from a trip. And I went down to the wineries in the Sonoita area. Sonoita is a small town in southeastern Arizona. Got 3 or 4 wineries together, and we had this big lunch. And we opened up the Macedonian wines, and we did a blind tasting, and the winemakers down there just loved them, and including a couple of bottles of Stanoshina. So anyway, that is going to be my farmer's pick. The title of the article, it's a YouTube link. It's A New Napa Valley Macedonian Wine, which as we get into summer, and as Macedonians are looking to travel around Macedonia and experience the beauty of Macedonia, Macedonian wine is one of those things that, well, that's what it means to be a Macedonian, is to drink Macedonian wine, because Macedonian wine is Macedonia in a bottle. That's my farmer's pick.
That's a good slogan for a campaign. You should trademark it before the Greeks get it.
I might do that. Well, I already have a couple of websites. I think I have MacedonianWineRoute.com is mine, and eventually that's another one of my projects is to actually establish a proper wine route in Macedonia. So we'll see, and we'll discuss more of that we'll discuss that a bit more next week, because next week, Cvetin, next Monday, May 25, I celebrate 24 years with Macedonia, which to me is a big deal.
Yeah, quarter century.
Almost. Well, going into my quarter century, yes. So anyway, we'll talk about that more next week. This has been a full podcast, and we'll see what happens in the coming week with regard to the elections.
Yeah, the Corona elections.
The Corona elections.
Officially called.
All right, good talking to you, Cvetin.
You too, buddy. Take care.
Yeah.